Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at some really interesting recent headlines.
Yeah, the idea is to get past the surface, and really unpack what's going on underneath.
Exactly. We want to make sense of it for you, not just tell you the news.
And we've got some great material to work with today. It's all from the Observer Group newspapers of Southern California, dated May 14th, 2025.
Wow.
So it's a really current snapshot, covers a lot, everything from the 5th anniversary of George Floyd's death to economic shifts, education stuff.
A real mix of what's important right now.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to, well, connect the dots between these stories, pull out some insights that might, surprise you.
And hopefully give you a clearer picture without feeling overwhelmed.
Okay, so let's dive in. First up, that 5-year mark since George Floyd's death. What are we seeing there?
Well, it's pretty striking, actually. There's this new Pew Research Center study, and it found a big majority, something like 72% of people, feel that all the focus on racial inequality.
Right.
Well, it hasn't really led to significant improvements for Black people.
Wow, 72%. That feels like a huge shift from, say, 2020. I remember there's a lot more optimism then, right?
Definitely. Back then, you had about 52% thinking meaningful change was likely. Now, that number's plummeted to just 27%.
That's quite a drop. Is it fatigue setting in, maybe? Or just a realization of how deep these problems run?
It seems like a widespread disillusionment, really, even among Democrats who were, pretty hopeful at the start, about 70% back in 2020. Now only 34% feel that way.
And are we seeing that reflected in support for movements like Black Lives Matter?
We are. Support peaked around 67% in 2020, and now it's sitting at 52%.
Okay.
It's worth noting, though, support is still highest among Black adults, Democrats, and younger folks under 30. White adults and Republicans show the lowest levels.
Right.
And the study, it included some personal thoughts, which really bring the numbers to life. There's this quote from a Black Republican, mid-40s. He said, "The justice system is not fair when it comes to Black people. When convicted of crimes, Black people always get heavier sentences than their white counterparts, even when they have no prior convictions."
That really puts a face on those statistics, doesn't it? That feeling of unfairness.
Absolutely. And that pessimism, it carries over to views about the future, too.
How so?
Overall, belief that Black people will eventually achieve equality, it's down from 60% to 51%. But the real story is the gap.
The gap.
Yeah, between Black and white adults. Only 32% of Black adults think equality is likely. For white adults, it's way higher, 61%.
That is a massive difference in perspective on the same country's future.
It really is. And if you connect this to sort of the broader context, we're seeing things like DEI initiatives being rolled back.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, right?
Exactly. Now, Trump's executive order was part of it, sure. But companies were already kind of pulling back before that, facing lawsuits, public pressure.
So it raises questions about, well, what's the real role for companies in these social issues? Is it genuine or just optics?
Well, the public seems split right down the middle, 50-50, on whether companies should even take stands on social or political topics.
Interesting.
But there's a lot of skepticism about those 2020 corporate statements. About 69% think companies made them because they felt pressured, not out of, real conviction.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I imagine there are political divides here, too.
Oh, absolutely. Stark ones. Most Black Americans feel the country hasn't gone nearly far enough on racial equality.
Okay.
Most Republicans, they think too much attention is paid to race. And Democrats generally feel there's still not enough focus. Big divides.
And what about the impact of video footage? Like the videos of police violence. Everyone's seen those.
Yeah, near universal exposure. Most people think the videos help hold officers accountable.
Good.
But a fair number also worry it hinders police work, makes their jobs harder. And again, demographics matter. Black adults and Democrats are much more likely to see the benefit of sharing those videos.
It sounds like people are just tired.
That came through loud and clear. Half of Americans said they feel exhausted just thinking about race.
Wow.
And the emotions differ by party. Democrats tend to feel anger, fear. Republicans more likely to feel uninterested or even satisfied.
And the bottom line on Black police relations since George Floyd, any improvement?
The assessment is pretty grim, honestly. Most say relations are no better, or maybe even worse. Very few see positive change.
And looking ahead, if there's a second Trump term.
Views are sharply divided, right along party lines, as you'd expect. Democrats mostly think things will get worse for race relations. Republicans mostly think they'll improve. It just shows how polarized everything is.
Yeah. That study had one more quote, didn't it?
It did, a really powerful one from a black Democrat in her early 70s. She said, black people still are paid less than whites when both are performing the same job. Black people are still looked at as criminals when they haven't committed any crimes.
Just highlights how persistent these inequalities feel, both economically and socially. Okay, let's shift gears now. Another big economic story. Student loan collections starting up again.
Yes, that's right. The Department of Education restarted collections on defaulted federal student loans back on May 5th. Remember, those had been paused since March 2020.
Right, the pandemic pause.
Yeah,
So this is a pretty big deal for a lot of people.
a huge deal. And the consequences for being in default, they're serious. We're talking potential withholding of tax refunds, federal benefits.
Even wage garnishment.
Exactly. They expect to start sending out notices for wage garnishment later this summer.
And just remind us of the scale here. How many people, how much money?
It's staggering. You've got about 42.7 million borrowers owing over $1.6 trillion in federal loans.
Wow.
And over 5 million are technically in default already. That's like over a year past due. Another 4 million are close to it.
So potentially.
Potentially, yeah. We could see up to 10 million people in default soon. That's like a quarter of the whole federal loan portfolio.
Does that suggest maybe there's a fundamental problem with how we're funding higher ed if so many people can't pay?
That's a big question. The Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, framed it differently. She said taxpayers shouldn't have to backstop irresponsible student loan policies. Basically, time to pay up.
So what are people supposed to do if they're in default?
The DOE is really pushing borrowers to contact their default resolution group. There are options.
Like what?
Things like setting up a monthly payment plan, maybe an income-driven repayment plan, where the payment is tied to your income. That can make it more manageable.
Right.
Or something called loan rehabilitation, where you make a certain number of on-time payments to get the loan back in good standing. The key is borrowers need to be proactive.
Definitely. Now, there's a racial disparity aspect to this too, isn't there?
Yes, and it's significant. Black college grads, on average, owe about $25,000 more than their white peers.
25,000 more.
Yeah. And 4 years after graduation, black students owe, get this, 188% more than they originally borrowed. They also report having a harder time making those monthly payments.
That's shocking. Why are people falling behind? Is it just not having the money?
Well, insights from TransUnion, the credit agency, suggest it's a mix. Sometimes it is capacity, they just can't afford it. Other times, maybe it's awareness, not knowing about the options or obligations. Or sometimes it's just navigating the system, finding the right info. And for some, maybe a lack of willingness for various reasons. It's complex.
So for anyone listening who is trying to manage payments, what's the advice?
Okay, key steps. First, know your situation. Review your balance, your interest rates. Get clear on what you owe.
Right.
Then, look at repayment plans. Choose one that actually fits your budget. The government has that loan simulator tool on studentaid.gov, which can help.
Okay, use the tools available.
Exactly. Use your loan servicer's website. Set up auto pay if you can. Helps avoid missed payments. And definitely look into forgiveness programs.
Like public service loan forgiveness?
Yeah, that's one. There's also teacher loan forgiveness through those income-driven plans eventually, and disability discharge, if that applies.
But those have rules, right?
Oh, yeah. Very specific eligibility requirements, often pretty strict. Again, studentaid.gov is the place to go for the official details on all of that.
Okay, good advice.
Yeah.
Let's move on now. Shifting from personal finance to corporate challenges. Target's been in the news.
Yes, they have. It's been a really watched situation. CEO Brian Cornell sent an email to employees recently.
What did it say?
He acknowledged it's been a tough few months, admitted a lapse in communication. This is all happening amid, falling customer traffic, boycotts, criticism over them scaling back some DEI stuff.
Right, the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives again. So he's trying to reassure people.
Pretty much. He said Target's values haven't changed. It's still the Target you know and believe in. But you have to wonder, does this signal a bigger challenge for companies trying to navigate these, very sensitive waters?
It seems like it. What triggered this specific backlash against Target?
It was kind of a combination. You had the ongoing pressure from tariffs hitting their profits, but then a really significant pushback from Black leaders and groups like the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the NNPA.
What was their issue?
They felt Target was backtracking on its DEI commitments. The NNPA even launched a campaign called for selective buying, basically flexing the economic muscle of Black consumers.
So how did Target respond publicly?
Well, a spokesperson talked about how important their team members are, the positive impact they have in communities, standard stuff.
But financially, has it hurt them?
It seems so. There are reports of revenue losses, their stock price took a hit, and apparently there are lawsuits tied to the changes in their DEI policies. It looks like it's had a real financial impact.
And Cornell, in that email, he tried to reaffirm values like inclusivity, right?
Yeah.
How did that land?
Not great, according to some retail analysts. They were pretty critical. Yeah, saying the email didn't really get to the root cause of the concerns. One analyst basically said, Target's claims about having the best products and experience just aren't true anymore. Ouch.
Yeah, that's harsh. Is there data to back up the idea that customers are staying away?
There is. Reports show foot traffic was down for 11 straight weeks with just one little blip up in mid-April. Overall, April reportedly saw like a 3.3% drop in customer visits.
So the pressure is real. I heard Cornell met with people involved in the boycott and even Trump.
That's the reporting, yeah. Meetings with Reverend Al Sharpton and others, and also with former President Trump about tariffs. Apparently, though, those meetings weren't mentioned in the employee email.
Interesting omission.
Meanwhile, people like Reverend Jamal Bryant are still calling for mobilization, demanding accountability from Target.
And other analysts, what was their take on the email itself?
Some described it as failing to take responsibility, kind of framing things as happening to Target, not acknowledging the company's role. One called it unfocused, even a jumbled mess. So it suggests maybe a disconnect between internal messaging and the external reality they're facing.
Okay, complex situation there. Let's pivot now, maybe to something more positive. California's efforts on childhood literacy.
Yes, this is potentially a really significant step forward for education in the state. There's a bill, Assembly Bill 1454.
AB 1454, what's it about?
It's all about strengthening early literacy, K through 5, basically. It just passed the Education Committee unanimously, which is a big deal.
Unanimously. How did that happen? I thought there was pushback on literacy bills before.
There was, but they reached a key compromise. The bill aims to equip educators with better evidence-based tools and training for teaching reading.
Okay, so what does it actually require?
It tells the California Department of Education, the CDE, to identify effective professional development programs for reading for teachers from TK through 5th grade. It also makes the state board update instructional materials for English language arts and English language development. And the Commission on Teacher Credentialing has to update standards for principals, basically, so they know how to support good literacy instruction.
You mentioned previous attempts stalled. What was the sticking point before?
Yeah, earlier bills like AB 2222 and 1121 faced opposition, especially from the California Teachers Association, the CTA. The big issue was mandatory standardization of reading instruction and training. Teachers' unions often resist that.
Ah, the mandatory part. So what was the compromise in AB 1454?
They made the reading instruction training discretionary instead of mandatory. That seemed to be the key to getting everyone on board.
So flexibility was the answer. What are people saying about it?
Well, Assemblymember Rivas called it essential progress for California's diverse students. Patricia Rucker from the CTA acknowledged everyone had to give a little to move forward.
Right.
Assemblymember Rubio called it a tough but really important fight.
And what about education advocates?
Marshall Tuck from EdVoice, they're an advocacy group, he pointed to other states like Mississippi and Louisiana.
What about them?
They implemented similar evidence-based reading policies and apparently saw real improvements. He contrasted that with California's current low rankings, especially for Black students and English learners, according to national test data.
So California's lagging behind. What does the data actually show?
EdVoice presented some pretty concerning stats. A lot of kids aren't reading at grade level by 3rd grade. Many finish elementary school without the basic skills they need.
And it affects some groups more than others.
Disproportionately, yes. Low-income students, Black students, Latino students, English learners. The statistic for Black 3rd graders reading at grade level was particularly alarming. And Tanya Kraft Perry from the Black Parent Network really hammered this home. She talked about the impact on Black and Latino kids, even connecting poor literacy to the school-to-prison pipeline.
Wow, that's a serious connection.
She stressed how crucial literacy is, not just for reading, but for critical thinking, research skills. So this bill, even with the compromise, feels like a really vital step.
Okay. Definitely something to watch. Now let's quickly run through some other political items from California in our political playback.
Sounds good. First up, California just marked its 3rd annual Black Health Equity Advocacy Week. That was May 5th to 9th.
What's the focus there?
Raising awareness and pushing for policy changes to address the health disparities that still hit Black communities hard. Assemblymember Akilah Weber, who's also a doctor, was key in getting this started.
And the theme this year?
We've got the power, really emphasizing policy and community involvement. They had social media campaigns, a rally, training sessions on specific health issues affecting Black Californians.
Got it. What else is happening in the state?
Economic news tourism brought in a record $157.3 billion in spending last year, 2024.
That's huge.
It is. But Governor Newsom also warned about a potential slowdown this year, 2025. He mentioned concerns about federal policies and a possible Trump slump affecting international travel.
A Trump slum.
Yeah, his term. So they're trying to boost in-state travel and visitors from Canada to maybe make up for it.
Okay. Anything else on the legislative front?
Yes, a change to the law on soliciting minors. Assembly Bill 379 was amended.
How so?
It basically increases penalties. If an adult solicits a 16 or 17-year-old and the adult is 3 or more years older, it can now be charged as a felony. It used to be a misdemeanor unless the age gap was smaller.
Okay, strengthening penalties there.
Right. And the bill also includes money for prosecuting human trafficking and supporting survivors.
Important work. Anything else?
Sadly, the passing of Nate Holden, longtime LA City Council member and state senator, he was 95, remembered as a real advocate for South Los Angeles.
A loss for the community.
Definitely. On a more positive note for schools, the state approved over $618 million for community schools.
Community schools, what does that mean?
It's part of a bigger program, the CCSPP. The idea is to integrate things like healthcare, mental health support, family engagement right into the school.
Ah, more than just academics.
Exactly. Both Newsom and Superintendent Thurmond really emphasize how vital these resources are for students' overall well-being and success.
Okay. And one last item.
Just the reaction to the election of the first American Pope, Leo XIV. Governor Newsom and former Speaker Pelosi both put out statements welcoming him.
What did they say?
Expressed hope for leadership, focused on compassion, dignity, unity, addressing global challenges.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've certainly covered a lot.
We really have. From the complexities around racial justice 5 years after George Floyd.
Right. And the student loan debt pressures hitting millions.
The challenges facing a major retailer like Target trying to navigate social issues.
And then those hopeful, if compromised, steps on literacy in California, plus all the other state news.
It really paints a picture of a dynamic and often pretty challenging moment in time.
And these stories, they aren't abstract, are they? They touch so many parts of your life. Your economic situation, social fairness, the education system.
Exactly. And understanding these nuances hopefully helps you feel more informed, more engaged with what's happening around you.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on as we wrap up.
Yeah, as we look at all these complex situations, think about how individual actions, corporate choices, and government policies all kind of weave together.
They all influence each other.
So the question is, what role can informed citizens like you play in actually shaping a future that's, well, more equitable and maybe more prosperous for everyone?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.